The letter said he was not coming. Clara Whitmore read it again. Then again. Her eyes moved over the same 12 words, as if they might soften with repetition, as if the English language might bend out of mercy, just this once. It did not. The ink stayed dark and firm and cold as a locked door, and somewhere behind her ribs, something that had been held carefully together for months began, very quietly, to come apart. Upon further consideration, I find that our arrangement no longer suits my circumstances. I wish you well in your future endeavors. No apology, no reason. No name signed at the bottom with even the basic courtesy of pretending he had once considered her a person. Just a clean ending to a future she had crossed half a country to begin. The train had pulled away 3 hours ago, swallowing its noise, and steamed back into the distance until there was nothing left but the platform, the heat, and Clara sitting on an oak trunk with a letter in her hands and nowhere on earth to put her grief. The town of Willow Creek had nearly slipped past her window when they arrived. A faded sign, peeling paint, a single wooden building. The kind of place that felt less like a destination and more like something you passed through on the way to somewhere worth going. The sun pressed down without apology. Heat gathered at the back of her neck and crept beneath the collar of her blue calico dress. The dress she had chosen because his letters said he admired modest colors. She had stood in the seamstress's shop in Philadelphia for 20 minutes, deciding between blue and green, and she had chosen blue, and now the fabric clung to her skin in ways that made her wish she had worn anything else, because there was no one here who would ever notice what color she had chosen, and there never had been. Everything she owned sat in the trunk beneath her. 3 dresses, her mother's Bible, its spine cracked from years of being held too tightly during difficult nights. A faded photograph of herself at 19, before her mother's illness, before the money ran out, before she had answered an advertisement in a newspaper and told herself that this was not desperation, but courage. $4 folded, inside her left glove, and nowhere to go. She folded the letter slowly, creasing it along its original lines, and slipped it back into her pocket. That same pocket had once held his first letter, the one that arrived on a Tuesday in February, when the Philadelphia winter had been so merciless she'd burned furniture to stay warm. That letter had been different. It had been full of words like, wide fields and good honest work and a man who means what he says. It had spoken of children who would run through tall grass. It had used the word home 4 times in 2 paragraphs, and Clara, who had not had a home since her mother died and the landlord came, had read that word 4 times and felt something in her chest open like a window after a long winter. She had burned that letter on the train somewhere past St. Louis. She did not want reminders of dreams that no longer belonged to her. Now she sat in the gathering heat of a town she did not know, on a trunk that held every remaining piece of her life, watching dust drift across an empty road. She was 26 years old. In 2 years she would be the age her mother had been when she first called herself old. Clara had always quietly promised herself she would not do that, would not let the world make her old before her time. She was reconsidering a great many promises today. A fly buzzed past. Somewhere inside the station, a telegraph machine ticked its lonesome rhythm, dots and dashes carrying other people's news to other people who were expected somewhere. Clara was not expected anywhere. That was, she was coming to understand, the particular weight of her situation, not just that he had not come, but that his not coming had made her disappear, not from the platform, but from the future. She had existed, in a sense, inside his plans. And now his plans had closed, and she was not inside anything at all. She pressed her thumb against the corner of the letter through the fabric of her pocket. I wish you well in your future endeavors. What endeavors? She had given up her room. She had spent $14 of her last $18 on the train ticket. She had told Mrs. Henley, who ran the boarding house, that she would not be returning. Mrs. Henley had hugged her at the door and said, "You deserve this, Clara." And Clara had carried those 4 words all the way across the country like a canteen, sipping from them whenever she grew afraid. She had drunk the last of them somewhere in Missouri. Mighty hot day to be waiting, a voice said. Clara looked up slowly. An older man stood nearby, holding a tin cup. His face was carved deep with lines that came not from age alone, but from years lived fully under open sky, sun and wind, and the particular weight of watching people arrive and leave, and sometimes not be met. A faded badge hung crooked on his vest. He had the careful stillness of someone who had learned that certain people needed to be approached the way you approached a bird on a fence post. Slowly, looking directly, without making any sudden move that might startle them into flight. "You got folks coming, miss?" he asked. Clara swallowed. The answer that came out was the truest one she had. "I thought I did," she said. The station master nodded once, slowly, with a gravity that told her he had heard that answer before. Perhaps, many times. Perhaps this platform had held other women on other trunks with other letters. He handed her the cup. The water was warm but clean. "That's a hard kind of waiting," he said. "Hardest kind there is," she said, and drank in small sips, because her mother had always said, "Never gulp water when you don't know when the next drink will come," and she had not known how useful that advice would become. Across the street, the long shadow thrown by the post outside the saloon, a man stood watching. He was not watching the way men sometimes watched women they did not know, with appetite or calculation or the slow assessment of something they were considering purchasing. He was watching the way a person watches something that reminds them of themselves, still, almost without breath. His name was Silas Turner, and he had come into Willow Creek for rope and salt, the same as every month. He bought what he needed. He did not linger. He did not make conversation beyond what courtesy required. He had built his entire life on the principle of taking up as little space as possible, in town, in conversation, in the world's general awareness. Grief, he had found, was easier to carry when no one knew you were carrying it. He had not moved from that post in nearly an hour. He watched her read the letter again. He watched her shoulders draw inward, pulling toward her own center the way a person pulls inward when the cold becomes too much and the body tries instinctively to protect whatever warmth remains. He recognized that posture. He had worn it the winter his father was buried behind the barn, beneath the cottonwood, in frozen ground that had to be broken with a pickaxe because the earth itself had not been willing to open easily for the man. Grief does not make you wise, but it does, sometimes, make you able to see. He watched her try to lift the trunk. It rose 3 inches. Then it slipped from her grip and dropped back to the platform, and she stumbled against it. And for one suspended moment she stood with her hand braced on the wood and her head bowed, and anyone watching could see that she was fighting something, far heavier than a trunk. Silas set down the glass of whiskey the bartender had poured him. He had stepped inside for 1 minute, asked one question, and learned everything he needed to know. Harrison's mail-order bride came all the way from Philadelphia. He sent word this morning he ain't taking her, said she wasn't worth the trouble. The liquid in the glass rippled once when he set it down. Then it went still. He was already moving, toward the door. He walked across the street slowly, with deliberate weight to each step, so she would hear him coming and not be startled. She turned. Her eyes were cautious and direct, and very tired in the way that eyes become when they've spent the day preparing for another blow. He removed his hat. "Miss Whitmore," he said. She straightened. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am." He turned his hat in his hands once. "Name's Silas Turner. I got a small ranch about half a day west." She waited. He noticed that she did not fill the silence. She let it sit between them, testing whether he would rush to fill it with something dishonest. He did not. "I heard what happened," he said. "About Harrison." Her chin lifted. Not from pride, exactly. From something older and more durable than pride. News travels fast. It does. A fly passed between them. The town was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone nearby has stopped pretending not to listen. "I could use some help," Silas said at last. Cooking, cleaning, nothing fancy, just room and board. He paused. No promises beyond that. She looked at him for a long moment, at his boots dusty from honest work, at the worn leather of his belt, at the small scar near his left thumb that suggested a man who worked with his hands and sometimes paid for it. "Why me?" she asked. He considered giving her a practical answer. There were practical answers available. Instead, he gave her the true one. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly. "Sitting somewhere, nobody coming." Something moved in her expression. Not much, but enough. The house stood alone against the fading light like a thing that had long ago stopped expecting anyone. Weathered boards, a fence gone crooked at the corners, a roof that had surrendered in places to the particular persistence of prairie weather. But smoke rose steady from the chimney, and Clara, who had spent 3 days on a train reminding herself not to want too much, looked at that smoke and felt something she had not felt since Philadelphia, evidence of someone still trying. "It ain't much," Silas said from beside her. "I've seen worse," she replied, and meant it. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood, and the particular absence that settles into a space when only one person has lived in it for too long. The table was solid oak beneath its coat of grime. The stove was worn, but sturdy. There were books on a shelf. This surprised her. And a quilt folded neatly on a narrow bed with the careful precision of someone who had no one to make the bed for but still could not bring himself to leave it unmade. She cooked that first night with what little she found in the pantry. Beans and bacon, dry bread, simple food, made carefully because her mother had taught her that the care you put into a meal is the care you put into the person you're feeding, even when the person is a stranger, even when the person is yourself. When she set the plate in front of Silas, he looked at it for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you," in the tone of a man relearning a word he had let go unused for too long. She did not say "you're welcome." She just sat down across from him, and they ate. The days found their shape slowly, the way rivers find their banks, not by force but by the patient repetition of flow. Clara scrubbed floors until the wood beneath showed pale and smooth as new skin. She washed windows until the light came through clean and whole. She swept dust from corners that had accumulated years of quiet, and she did not remark on any of it, because the house was not a reproach, and she did not intend to use it as one. On the third day, she found the garden. It was behind the house, a patch of earth gone wild with weeds, but beneath them, when she pushed her fingers through to the soil, the dirt was dark and rich and alive. She stood there a long moment, feeling it between her fingers, thinking of her mother's kitchen window in Philadelphia, where a single pot of basil had lived on the sill for 11 years and been consulted like a family member before every meal. "Mind if I plant something?" she asked. Silas was mending fence nearby. He looked at her hands, already streaked with soil, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the door that a smile might one day open. "It's your kitchen," he said. "Plant what you want." She found old seed packets in a wooden box. Basil, mint, sage. She pressed each seed into the earth slowly, with intention, the way you do when you are putting something into the ground that you actually want to come back. That night, sitting on the porch with one of the worn books from the shelf, she heard it, a harmonica, soft at first, almost hesitant, as if it had been a long time since it was played and needed to be reminded of its purpose. Then stronger, fuller, a melody that moved the way grief moves, not in a straight line, not toward any obvious conclusion, but in long, slow arcs that keep returning to the same bruised note. She did not go inside. She sat in the dark and listened until the last note dissolved into the sound of the prairie grass moving, and she understood without needing to be told that she was hearing something private, something that a man allows himself only when he believes no one is close enough to witness it. She said nothing. He said nothing. He stepped out onto the porch a few minutes later, and they sat in the dark side by side, not touching, not speaking, looking out at the wide black sky where stars were coming on one at a time like small fires being lit in distant windows. "Ain't played in 2 years," he said eventually. She did not ask why. That was the moment, though she would not understand it for weeks yet, that the house stopped being a place she had ended up, and became a place she might, if she were careful and honest, and brave, actually choose. The basil had grown past Clara's ankles by the time summer settled fully over the prairie. She knelt in the garden on a Tuesday morning with her hands in warm soil, breathing in the sharp green scent of the leaves, and she was struck without warning by the particular quality of the light, the way it lay across the fence Silas had rebuilt, across the roof he had repaired, across the windows she had washed until they held the sky clear and whole. And she thought, this is what tended things look like. She had never had the opportunity to know that before. Silas was at the gate, driving the last nail. He worked differently now than he had that first week. Less like a man trying to outrun something, more like a man who had decided, quietly and without ceremony, to stay. She had not seen the exact moment of that decision. She had only noticed, over weeks, that his movements had changed. The set of his shoulders, the way he sometimes paused in the middle of a task to look at the garden, or the house, or at her, with an expression she could not entirely name, but had stopped being afraid of. "Supper in an hour," she called. He nodded once. Then the rider came. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him, fast, deliberate, raising a trail of dust on the road from town. He wore a polished vest with a silver pin shaped like a bold H. Her stomach tightened in the old reflexive way, the way a body tightens when it remembers something that hurt it. "Miss Whitmore," he pulled up short. "I work for Mr. Harrison. He says he made a mistake, wants to speak with you, offer you the life you were promised." The world tilted, just slightly, the way a table tilts when one leg is shorter than you realized. "He's a wealthy man," the rider pressed into her silence. "Big house, security, a proper life." He looked around at the small house, the mended fence, the garden, the humble, ordinary evidence of ordinary days well used. "Better than this." The words landed the way he intended them to. She felt the color rise in her face and her grip loosen on the watering can, and then the can slipped and she stumbled and went down hard into the wet earth, and the rider laughed. Just briefly, just quietly, just enough. She lay there a moment in the mud she had just made. She thought of 12 words on a letter, of a trunk on a platform, of $4 in a glove. She thought of the particular quality of humiliation, which is not the same as pain. Pain is something that happens to you, but humiliation is the story you're told about yourself by someone who has decided you are not worth the basic respect of privacy. "Tell him no," she said. She said it quietly. That was the part she would remember, that she had not shouted it, had not needed to, had simply said it in a steady voice from the mud, as if the answer had always been clear and was only now being spoken aloud. The rider shrugged and turned his horse and was gone. Silas had crossed the yard without her hearing him. He stood a few feet away. "What did he say?" he asked. "Nothing that matters," she said, and pushed past him into the house, tracking mud across the clean floor she had scrubbed on her knees 3 weeks ago, and went into the small bedroom and closed the door and sat with her back against it and waited for the shame to finish moving through her. When she opened the door an hour later, a plate sat on the floor outside. Cold beans and bacon. A fork placed neatly beside it, with the precision of someone who understood that small dignities are not small. Beneath the plate was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it with hands that were not quite steady. 2 words, in rough, unschooled handwriting, written as if they had cost him something. "Stay, please." She pressed the note against her chest and sat on the floor of the hallway for a long time. Outside, the prairie moved in the wind. The basil grew. The sunflowers Silas had helped her plant 2 weeks ago were working their way upward toward the light, with the slow and absolute confidence of things that have no reason to doubt they are wanted. The next morning, she stepped onto the porch where he sat with 2 cups of coffee. Steam rose from both. "I'm not leaving," she said. He nodded once, handed her the cup. They watched the sun come up over the prairie in silence, and the silence was not empty. It was full of all the things that did not need to be said, because both of them, finally, already knew them. I know what it is to sit somewhere with nobody coming. I know what it is to stay. I know now the difference. That evening he played the harmonica again, and the melody was different. Lighter, steadier, moving toward something, instead of circling around a loss. When the last note ended, she turned to him in the warm dark, and he was already looking at her, and neither of them looked away. His hand found hers on the porch step. Her fingers turned upward. He laced his through them with the slow certainty of someone who has decided, without fanfare, without condition, to hold on. The stars came out one by one above the wide-open land. The cottonwood behind the barn moved. In the night wind, and beneath it, in the ground that had once been too frozen to give easily, his father rested, and his mother, who had loved poetry and music, and every version of Silas Turner that had not survived the years of waiting alone, those selves were here too, quiet in the earth, watching the man who remained choose, freely, to stay. "I was waiting for someone who never planned to come," Clara said softly. "Turns out I wasn't meant to be waiting at all." He tightened his hand around hers and did not answer, because some truths arrive not as words but as weight. The warm and steady weight of another person, present, close, not going anywhere. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called once into the wide black sky. The prairie answered with wind and grass and the 10,000 small sounds of living things at rest. Clara closed her eyes. She had arrived exactly where she was meant to be. She had simply needed to stop being where she was expected.